All right, folks, I hope you have those thoughts organized and those good stories ready to go. We are filming, so as you have those amazing Joe stories that you want to share, please feel free to come up to the mic. And here's the thing, I understand not everybody's come up to the mic kind of person, but we'd love to hear those stories. Even if you don't feel comfortable sharing them right now, feel free to reach out sometime. And just let us know those meaningful moments that were special to you. So, the mic is officially open for whoever wants to start.
John,
The mess this week. Scary.
Hi, this is really short. I'm Allegra, or as Joe would say, Allegra. Really, really short, but when Tom was telling his stories about Tom Sutter, about Joe saying, encouraging people to imagine Jesus sitting with you in the car next to you as you're driving, I took that to heart. He would come and minister to me when I was dealing with moving here from Wisconsin and quite depressed about it. So I did imagine that, burst out laughing, and I did share this with Joe because I said there was Jesus not talking in my van, white knuckling it as I was driving. I was terrified that we were in a car. That's all.
you want to shake around a little longer, or you want to let the door? Okay. Everybody here, just keep on keeping on. Take care.
Come and see us anytime.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike McDowell. I'm a retired pastor at the Presbyterian Church USA, and my relationship with Joe goes all the way back to the Cincinnati years. I was an associate pastor of a church in Cincinnati, and that's where I first got to meet Joe back in the long time ago, 50s. But I remember a story he told about me to me one time. He said, "Mike, I had a dream about you last night." I said, "You did?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, in this dream, I had died." He was talking about himself. He says, "I died and I got to heaven. And St. Peter took me back to a waiting room. And he said, 'Have a seat, Joe.' Well, this waiting room was lined with millions of clocks, and they were all going at different speeds. And Peter finally came back and he said, 'Well, Joe, we checked all your records, and you're going to make it. You're okay. It's good.' He said, 'Do you have any questions?' And he said, 'Well, yes.' He said, 'I'm wondering what all these clocks are for.' And Peter said, 'Well, look, if you look closely, every clock has a name underneath. It has somebody's name, and those are all people on earth. And that's the way we keep records in heaven.' He said, 'It is.' He said, 'Yes, every time.' Now you see, there goes one of the hands around on the clock. Whenever somebody sins, it records it on the clock. And we have one for everybody in the world.' And he said, 'Well, I don't see a clock for me there.' And he said, 'Well, Joe, when you die, we take your clock off the wall and take it back to our reading room, and it computes the number of times you sin with the years that you've lived. And that's how we keep record.' I know it's not biblical, but it's a dream. And he said, 'Well, I remember that my friend Mike McDowell was still alive, but I don't see a clock for him anywhere.' And Peter smiled. He said, 'Well, that's because we keep Mike's clock in the office and use it for a fan.' Well, I must say, I've always been one of Joe's biggest fans, and really missed the guy, the sweetest gentlest, most loving guy I have ever known in my life, and I'm privileged to have known Joe Pallikkathayil. Thanks. Just wanted to share that.
I just want to say that it's been wonderful being friends with the Pallikkathayils as long as we have, since February of 1990. Our sons, our oldest son and Jyoti, have been friends since then. And it was wonderful to serve under Joe for 17 of his 20 years here as the music ministers, my wife and I. And we owe him a debt of gratitude, because he's the one that invited us to move up north of the river and to work here at the church. He called me once in December of 1989. He got our name from another pastor that we knew at Second Pres, south of the river. And he said, Ted, I would like to invite you and your wife to come be the music director and organist at our church. And I said, no, thank you. Well, about a month later, he called again. Julia answered the phone, not me.
That's right.
And so she said, sure, we'll give it a try. And we're still here. But also, because, and then Joe also helped us find a place to live here a couple of years later. And if we hadn't moved up here, our sons wouldn't have met their wives. We wouldn't have the grandchildren that we have. Our daughter met our wonderful son-in-law. And we've been very, very blessed. And so we owe Joe and his family a real debt of gratitude. Thank you.
I'm Don Gladhart from Brookdale and St. Joseph. A deep gratitude from our church. We were the first interim after Joe's miracle surgery. And as was mentioned earlier by Mark, this church has a lot of Camino alumni. And I was the first from our church to come to Camino. That was 2011, and Joe was already gone. Mark was here, so for the next, couple years, I just heard stories about Joe. And then I happened to be on the search committee when we were going through the transition to EPC, and lo and behold, I met Joe, and he came in. To tell you the truth, I can't even remember the other candidates. And he was so overwhelming, as we heard today. And in that story, I heard it firsthand. It really did seem like a miracle. But in terms of what he did for our church during that time, just very uplifting. Very loyal to us, we're just I'm personally forever grateful, but I know our church is too.
My name is Doug Sprouse. I guess I've connected with a number of different ways, but following a Brookdale Presbyterian Church where Joe had served as an interim. I remember gathering with evangelical pastors once a month. Joe was one that was constantly a person who sought to live out the personhood of Jesus Christ. Wherever he was a presence. And you could feel it. Something led me to ask Joe if I could just simply break bread together with him. And he says, well, come to the neighborhood cafe. And I had a hard time finding a neighborhood cafe here. I get in this neighborhood, and I'm a pretty good person when it comes to a visual map, but the different streets and how the interstate comes across, and I literally had to call Joe's wife 3 times to say, I'm at a said location, how do I get to the neighborhood cafe? And finally she gave up and she says, just drive to my house and I'll show you the neighborhood cafe. And so I went up to the bluff and I'm there, and I go to the house, and then I follow her to the neighborhood cafe, and I sit down with Joe. The presence of Jesus is at that time. It happened to be, something led me to say, Joe, how you decide